Hello, this is Raney Bench, Executive Director for the MDI Historical Society. As part of our ongoing series about the relevance of history, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of consolidation related to the MDI Regional High School. The Mount Desert Island Historical Society is collaborating with the school district not to promote a specific position or to support any outcomes for the current conversations that are taking place about the future of our schools. Rather, the MDI Historical Society believes that history is relevant, and learning how people addressed shared challenges in the past can help us as we navigate challenges today. History can help inform our conversations and provide useful tools to analyze the present. With that in mind, we're going to look at a couple of brief examples that help us understand the larger trends that are influencing the current moment. 2026 marks the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, a radical document proclaiming the separation from the British royal crown. It sparked a great experiment in which the rule of law was derived from the consent of the governed, by the people and for the people, rather than decreed by the divine right of kings. Over the past 250 years, America has struggled and thrived under this model. We participate in our democracy on different levels, from the larger national representative system to the debates and discussions that take place locally as we grapple with collective decision making. But the uniting thread that holds national and local democracy together is you. Democracy needs each and every one of us to participate if it's going to work the ways that we need it to, not just by voting, but by listening, learning, volunteering, and sharing. The examples that we'll be looking at through this presentation show us just how that can happen on a small community level. Because democracy is hard and it's messy, but our history can teach us how to engage in debate and conversations that ultimately lead to community growth. We can learn lessons from the past and we can build new tools that will help improve our process. As an island, we're up against some tough challenges. Disagreements about how to manage tourism, sustainability, climate change, housing, the cost of living, and school restructuring are just a few. Over the past 5 years, the MDI Historical Society has been working with lots of partners to use the lens of history to explore complicated and difficult issues facing our communities today. History can help us find relief from the immediacy of our current challenges as we take the long view and persevere to find common solutions. We're going to take a quick look at the two-decade debate about the high school consolidation that led to the establishment of MDI Consolidated High School. What tools can we bring forward from the past as we consider current discussions taking place about the future of our schools? But first, let me give you a few examples of the kinds of lessons we can learn from island history. For example, after intensive logging clear-cut most of the island by the 1880s, concerns about continued logging and environmental destruction led to summer and year-round residents to come together across different values and needs to establish a culture of conservation that led to the establishment of Acadia National Park. The lessons that we learned are that through shared values, listening, and compromise, mutually beneficial outcomes can be agreed upon. For over a decade, between 1903 and 1915, island towns and summer and year-round residents argued about whether to allow cars on the island. Each town had the right to vote whether or not to allow cars. Mount Desert and Eden voted no, and Tremont voted yes, creating geographic challenges to access the quiet side of the island. Threats, financial incentives, and fear tactics were argued in the newspapers and at town meetings. Each town advocated for their own interests, creating unequal impacts from the residents of neighboring towns, and waves of uncontrollable consequences resulted. For example, Bar Harbor's ban meant that Tremont residents were unable to take advantage of the economic opportunities offered by auto tourism. The lessons learned during this debate are that in the absence of a decision made locally, outside forces will come in and make the decisions for us. In this case, the state passed a law allowing automobiles on all main roads, banning local ordinances to the contrary. The rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s is oftentimes shocking for people to learn about today, but Maine had the largest Klan membership of any state outside the United States South, and it had the first daytime parade of the Klan that took place in this state. Mainers joined the Klan's effort to exclude Catholics and Jews from serving on school boards and as elected officials. The Klan was responsible for influencing elections throughout the state, culminating in the election of Governor Brewster in 1925. At its height, in 1925, over 23% of Mainers were members of the Klan. In Trenton, a rally of 7,000 Klan members took place with hooded figures and burning crosses. We also know that a cross was burned on a lawn in Northeast Harbor, and islanders from every town attended rallies and meetings. But fears fueled by outsiders quickly faded as islanders realized their neighbors did not pose the threat claimed by the Klan. And just as quickly as membership rose, it fell again, and by the 1930s, the Klan had essentially been driven out of the state. Our lessons learned from this history are that fear and hyperbole are powerful influences and drive people to make decisions that contradict their own best interests, even in the face of personal experience and evidence to the contrary. So, with these lessons in mind, let's shift to the debate about whether to open a consolidated high school that took place between the 1940s and 1960s. The history of how MDI High School came into being is a great example of persistence, robust community discussions, and compromise. This process remains a point of pride for many islanders as an example of how we can come together for the good of our community. MDI is no stranger to school consolidation. At one point, we had over 36 individual schools, from one-room schoolhouses to high schools. Over the years, all but 5 have consolidated. At no time was this an easy or straightforward process. But the consolidation many remember, and the one that we often talk about today, is the consolidation of 4 town high schools into one island high school. Public discussion of consolidation into this high school began in 1948 with a study of conditions at the 4 high schools at the time and a recommendation to consolidate that would require approval from the 4 island towns. It took almost 20 years and 3 votes before the new high school was approved. Nostalgia plays an interesting role in this conversation because there are elders in our community who remember when there were 4 high schools and the opening of the new high school. And what most people recall was the importance of basketball to the debate. Each town wanted to retain their high school basketball team, and this, in our modern memory, was the primary reason to fight consolidation. And to be sure, basketball did play an important role in this conversation, even being cited as the main reason Mount Desert voted not to consolidate during the first vote. Civic pride and community spirit were among top concerns. In a 1949 editorial in the Bar Harbor Times, Stephen Hammer asked residents, quote, "Are you in favor of taking away your community and your children, one of the backbones of Maine life, the community school and community school spirit? A great portion of our winter life is made up of following, with avid interest, our own community school's activities and basketball team. The consolidation plan would erase all of this." Parents were concerned about polarization of students within the new school. Kids would remain divided by town and form cliques, not integrate. Bernie Parody, coach and math teacher at Gilman High School in Northeast Harbor and later athletic director at the Mount Desert Island Regional High School, supported consolidation, but upon reflection noted that consolidation was so divisive that for decades after the new high school opened, there were still families whose members would not speak to one another. Mr. Parody stated that basketball was a key issue for many who were enormously proud of their town teams. In 1958, the PTA of the town of Mount Desert held a panel discussion for students on the issue of consolidation. Joyce Higgins said, quote, "Let's face it, basketball means more to our parents than it does to us." Primarily, the high school profile concern about basketball was really a concern about civic pride and identity. People who were concerned about losing their basketball teams were actually talking about losing kids from their towns. Robert Summonsby, a prominent businessman in Northeast Harbor and longtime devoted scoutmaster, said that in the old days, people lived in the villages and few children had to be bused very far. Now families live much further from schools, and the children don't seem to be as much a part of the life of the village. We lost the kids from the community. You just don't see them as much. This fear of losing kids from the community was the main reason why Southwest Harbor voted no during the second vote. People talked about missing the school band playing at different events throughout the town, having parades take place during the town, and having the band play during town meetings. They were worried about missing kids walking around town after school, giving them a connection to the people who own businesses, to the library, or just multi-generational interactions. They were also concerned about missing sporting events that relieved winter boredom and isolation, and it connected townspeople with others from their community, and it was an important part of their daily life. At the time, MDI wasn't perceived as an island. MDI was a series of 4 towns, and your identity was tied to your town. Beyond this, people also feared what it meant for kids to leave their towns. They were concerned about losing local control of the curriculum and what was being taught in the school, but also those personal relationships that parents had with teachers and administrators. And there was a fear that the school governing body, or the board, would be dominated by Bar Harbor residents because it had the largest population. There were also concerns about busing. In 1949, Mrs. Hayes, head of the Southwest Harbor PTA, said her members, quote, "do not like the idea of their children riding so many miles on the bus to and from school. This would mean that they would have to leave early and get home late, losing a good deal of contact with their homes and community." There were four main themes that people debated: financial, academic, sports, and guidance. We've talked about sports already and the loss of community people feared would come if students attended schools located outside of their town. But others argued that student athletes would benefit from consolidation because there could be more types of sports offered, and with a larger student body, there would be JV teams for the more popular sports, increasing the number of students who could participate. There's more depth to each of the arguments, but we're going to move on to the other three concerns. The 1948 survey examined conditions of education quality and opportunity for students in all MDI schools, but focused primarily on the four high schools. It also examined the physical buildings, student enrollment and projections, and budgets. Thanks to a grant from the Rockefeller family, a team of experts in education came to MDI to conduct interviews and analysis that included leaders from the state's Department of Education, the University of Maine, and outside experts from Massachusetts and New York. Islanders were sometimes critical of these outside experts, telling them what to do with their schools, and the report's recommendations were at times divisive. Their findings led debates that took place in every town for 20 years, at PTA meetings, town meetings, special meetings, in the newspapers, and on street corners. And at least in the public record, the tenor of the discussions was primarily respectful, with most people acknowledging that everyone wanted what was best for students, but some heated comments are recorded. Bell Smallage Knowles argued that with each previous consolidation of schools, more knowledgeable teachers were hired and better educational opportunities were available to students. This created a backlash of support for the quality of current teachers. Charles Savage expressed frustration at the newspapers for publishing opinion pieces about consolidation before the report was made public, saying, quote, "it undermined the findings of the report," and he accused the papers of not attempting to answer questions about which, without the report, knowledge must at best be unprofessional. Ruth Jewett took this anger one step further by suggesting that anyone arguing against consolidation be fined if they had not read the materials prior to attending public meetings and expressing their opinions. The 1948 study analyzed student attendance rates and how those would change in the future, projecting an increase in each town. It also noted that most students lived in the towns in which they attended schools. Few students came from off-island, which would have resulted in increased income from tuition. From the report, quote, "these resident pupils can come from two sources only: children born within the area served by the school and children from families which have moved in after the children were born elsewhere. Successful attempts at estimating future school enrollment on Mount Desert Island then must be based on trends in these two arcs: births to parents who are residents of the island and families who move to the island after their children have been born." Rather than basketball, the most debated topic reported in the newspapers was financial. Student attendance trends were compared with the facilities currently serving as high schools and found that none of the high schools could accommodate increasing student numbers. The report found that Gilman High School in Mount Desert, Tremont, and Bar Harbor's high school buildings were in poor condition, lacking adequate heat, ventilation, science equipment and labs, art and music facilities, among other things. Bar Harbor specifically was called out for decades of deferred maintenance that meant the town would need to consider a new high school, but it was also recommended that Gilman and Tremont schools be closed. Dean Scheibels warned residents during public meetings and in editorials that, quote, "if only one town builds its own high school, it will automatically assume the responsibility for limiting the opportunities for all children on the island." Additional financial concerns cited redundancies in operating four independent high schools, specifically citing payroll because each school was required to hire their own teachers. This argument often backfired because the threats of layoffs were more concerning to the communities than the cost of maintaining teachers. But redundancies went beyond payroll to include spaces and equipment, administration and busing, all opportunities advocates for consolidation pushed. The report noted that the cost of education on the island is out of proportion to the value received and can only be remedied by consolidation. Over the 2 decades of debate, the financial formula shifted in response to community concern and investments, or lack thereof, in town schools. The first vote about whether to consolidate failed when residents of Mount Desert voted against consolidation at a special meeting. Farnham Butler, who had been chair of the school consolidation committee, anticipated this loss, citing basketball as the main reason. After this vote failed, Mount Desert went ahead and built its own new school after the report noted that Gilman High School needed to be abandoned. But the failure of the first vote did not end the discussions about a new high school. And as they continued, various financial models were created and adjusted to meet the concerns of residents to ensure an equal and realistic burden be distributed across all towns. The committee continued to push, arguing that to ensure a competitive education that would prepare students for college or entering the workforce, a new high school was necessary. After the loss of the first vote, academic and guidance arguments start to take center stage in the public record. Students needed state-of-the-art science labs, better athletic programs, a kitchen and cafeteria where they could enjoy healthy lunches, music rooms and theater programs to fulfill the needs of students with various interests, and home economic and shop classes to prepare them for adulthood. The committee pointed out that there was a wide divide of skills and education among graduates from the four high schools, meaning that not all MDI graduates enjoyed the same opportunities. Of the academic arguments, two themes can be traced to the public record. First, class sizes were too small at the existing schools. This meant that fewer classes could be offered, and it also meant that classes students needed to graduate were offered less often. But most importantly, the small class size meant that students of all academic abilities had to attend the same classes. In other words, students who excelled in a subject took classes with students who needed additional help, which was bad for both kids. The students who excelled weren't able to progress as fast as they could, and students who struggled were left behind. Larger class sizes would allow for more classes at various academic levels, but it also meant more variety for students in different subjects. The committee was also concerned with teacher workloads being unequal across schools and courses. The second theme was that a consolidated high school could better prepare students for life after high school, whether that meant college or a trade. The committee pushed the idea that the purpose of a quality high school education was for students to graduate understanding their civic responsibilities and take up the role of an adult. A broader offering of courses was one component, but guidance was another. Guidance is a support system to help students with academic planning, career exploration, skills development, college planning and applications, personal and social growth, and life skills needed after graduation, which did not exist among the four schools. The committee pushed the importance of a guidance program at a consolidated high school as an improvement necessary for students to graduate. School committees, PTAs, and special meetings were held regularly where Islanders could learn more and discuss their hopes and concerns, trying to envision a future that improved opportunities for students while keeping their communities intact. Initially, meetings were held only by and for residents of specific towns, but after the failure of the first vote, we start to see island-wide meetings take place. Often these were combined with a community supper, and the newspaper reports hundreds of people in attendance. For the first time, we start to see a shift from town-driven identity to a recognition that MDI is one island, as residents shared concerns common across municipal lines. In 1959, a second vote was held. This time, Southwest Harbor voted against consolidation. They cited local control as their main concern, fearing a common school board would remove their town's ability to establish curriculum and classes best for their students. They worried that Bar Harbor's larger population would result in more school board members who would override the interests of smaller towns. Southwest Harbor formed its own commission to study consolidation, but there are no known records of their meetings or findings. Bar Harbor voted in favor because they were still struggling with deferred maintenance, so they saw the value of a new school, knowing one way or another they were going to have to make a major investment. At least in a consolidated school, they could share the costs. Mount Desert voted in favor primarily, as reported at the time, because the voting population was middle class and many had college degrees, so they recognized the value in improved academic opportunities. In Tremont, who had fewer college-educated residents, voters placed a high value on education as a means of improving economic opportunities for their kids. Tremont also voted in favor of the new high school, but all four towns were required to approve, so the vote failed. It's interesting to note here that in addition to deep concerns that the residents of Southwest Harbor had about losing their kids and local control over the quality of their education, Pematic was the only building not called out in the 1948 report as being insufficient for high school. It's possible that part of Southwest Harbor's reasons for voting no is they didn't have the same pressing facility needs as the other towns. After the failure of the 1959 plan, the Consolidation Committee continued their efforts to address the concerns of each town. In 1965, the 101st Legislature had passed a special law, HB 475, designated specifically for the situation at MDI. The law permitted towns to create a high school without putting their elementary schools into a consolidated district. Critical to the solution was a funding formula tailored to the needs of the island, which provided that expenses would be calculated, quote, 1/3 in proportion to the number of pupils and 2/3 in proportion to the property valuation of each of the towns. This formula meant Bar Harbor would pay about 43%, Mount Desert 31%, Southwest Harbor 16%, and Tremont 8.5% of expenses for the regional high school. This was one of the critical changes that alleviated fears and combined with continued community conversations, listening sessions, and a push that Consolidated High School was best for island students. In 1965, the vote finally passed. And the first integrated basketball team, coached by Bernie Parody, won the state championship, breaking down barriers and helping to create a new culture of MDI as an island. Our lessons learned from the high school debate are that persistence is key. Listening, responding, adjusting, and compromise can eventually result in an outcome that serves the needs of all communities.